Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. In the lead up to his trial in November 1975, 23-year-old Patrick MacKay, the drunk, the druggie, the bully, and the petty pointless thief, who many said would amount to nothing, had become a celebrity. MacKay was front-page news for almost a year, with his stage-managed photos under every headline, his confession of "I killed 11 people" printed in bold, his memoir repeated verbatim, his nickname cementing his legacy, and his name preceded by maniac, monster, psychopath, and now serial killer. What began as a petty and pathetic series of half-witted robberies to fund his alcoholism culminated in an 18-month campaign of violence and terror, with the bulk committed in the last 2 months. It wasn't planned, it wasn't neat, and possibly spawned from the accidental killing of Isabella Griffiths in a short burst of rage, as any of the 23-plus frail old ladies he'd robbed and assaulted could have been. The press bought the lie, as MacKay wasn't a thug, but a bright, erudite storyteller who sought infamy. Questioned by Detective Superintendent John Bland at Brixton Prison in April 1975, MacKay admitted,
"All I want to do is to be frank and honest,"
having admitted to 3 provable murders.
"But before I start, I've got another murder I want to get off my mind."
Being the drowning of a homeless man at Hungerford Bridge, and confessing or suspected of a total of 8. That took his tally to 11 kills. It was the moment which made him famous. But caught in a series of lies, he would also be forgotten. Patrick MacKay, Two Sides of a Psychopath, Part F. His arrest record, dating back to when he was 12, was hardly the stuff of legend. 1967, age 12, he got 3 years probation for stealing garden ornaments and setting fire to a church curtain. 1966, a 12-month discharge for breaking a window. 1968, 2 years probation for GBH and 1 day in prison for robbing a boy of a watch. 1973, 3 convictions: burglary while drunk and issuing a forged cheque, possession of an offensive weapon while drunk, and damage to a property while drunk and disorderly, with his longest stretch being 4 months for the burglary of Reverend Brack's vicarage, in which he stole nothing. Luckily for him, the newspapers were too distracted by the unprovable details of his alleged cruelty to animals and his so-called obsession with the Nazis to explore his paltry criminal past or his confession. Of the 8 murders he was suspected of or confessed to, Heidi Manil's case was high profile, so parts he could recall, but he still got details wrong and there was no proof he was even there. He confessed to Mary Hines, but had to be coerced by detectives. Stephanie Britton and Christopher Martin he denied killing, possibly to protect his legacy. Leslie Goodman he confessed only to the robbery, maybe to give his murders a sense of mystery. And Sarah Rodmell he denied, perhaps owing to the sexual element. He could of course be innocent of all 6 murders, but there was no solid evidence to convict him. As for the homeless man he supposedly drowned, MacKay said,
"I lost my temper. I grabbed him by the pants and the neck and heaved him over the edge. The water splashed up. He must have gone under. And then I saw him come up. He started splashing, and then he went under again."
Police pulled 3 bodies from the river, and none matched this description. But as a film fan who was inspired by the 1970s craze for serial killer movies, A Clockwork Orange was withdrawn from circulation in 1973 due to copycat violence, especially in one scene where a homeless man is murdered. But Or was this an inspiration for MacKay's lie? It made perfect sense for MacKay to lie about killing 11 people, of which 8 he later denied. Of the killers who existed in his era or were popular in the crime books he read, George Chapman the Borough Poisoner, Trevor Hardy the Beast of Manchester, Ronald Jepson the Babes in the Wood Killer, John Strafford, who was Britain's longest-serving prisoner until MacKay, and Graham Young the Teacup Poisoner, all had 3 confirmed kills, but are still largely forgotten by the general public. Whereas to be infamous and cement his everlasting legacy, 3 confirmed kills wouldn't be enough. John George Haigh, the acid bath murderer, had 6. John Reginald Christie of 10 Rillington Place had 8. Thomas Neil Cream and the Moors murderers both had 5. Gordon Cummings, the Blackout Ripper, had 4, but is mostly unknown due to the war. Jack the Ripper had an unprovable canonical 5, although who needs proof with such a sensationalist story? And with a new breed of killers, like the Zodiac with 5 and Edmund Kemper with 10. By tomorrow, MacKay's forgotten headlines could be used to wrap fish and chips. MacKay would have known that his pitiful backstory lacked credibility, that his accusations of sadism were paper-thin, that his photos and quotes were obviously curated, that many detectives felt he was an inveterate liar who lies about trivial matters even when it's unnecessary. And with all 3 killings he was convicted of being manslaughters, not murders, his ploy could be easily picked apart. Since his release from Wandsworth Prison, having planned a campaign of violence and terror, across January to March 1975, there was a clear escalation in his attacks on wealthy, elderly ladies across Chelsea, Belgravia and Finchley, with one erroneous attack on Sunday the 3rd of February 1975 at Red Lion Square in Holborn, where he violently robbed an old lady on her doorstep of £25 and an inscribed silver pen. By that point, his robberies were almost a daily event, ending with the killing of Father Anthony Green on the 21st of March. When arrested at the Cowdrey's home at 48 Grantham Road in Stockwell, MacKay was sat on the sofa, hungover, and when asked what he would do that day, he simply said,
"Dunno, probably get pissed again."
But by then, MacKay had murdered 3 people. So why did he stop? Why did he then confess to killing 8 more? And then withdraw his confession? Of those he'd confessed or was suspected of, they were all as similar in method and motive as they were dissimilar, and as provable in evidence as they were disprovable. But unlike the first 7 killings, the 8th had one thing that the others lacked: DNA evidence. Ivy Lillian Davies, known to her customers as Auntie Ivy, was a 48-year-old cafe owner from the seaside town of Westcliff-on-Sea on the southeast coast of England in the county of Essex, 50 miles west of MacKay's hunting ground of Chelsea and Belgravia, and 28 miles north of his hometown of Dartford. Born on the 30th of December 1926, little was reported about her early life, but described as a well-liked and popular woman with a bubbly personality and a good morning for everyone. There was a great pain in her heart and an intense loneliness she would hide from her friends and her customers. In her early 20s, having met and married a soldier whose surname was Slark, Ivy had lived a very unsettled life, being bounced between army bases all over the UK as the Cold War slowly heated up. As a squaddie's wife, she had just one purpose: to bear children. And from the late 1940s, 8 would follow. Patricia, Ivy Jr., Susan, Victor, David, Stephen and Carol, with Karen dying aged just 3 months. With no money, no freedom, and a husband who was physically violent and mentally abusive to this small dark-haired woman with thick-rimmed glasses. For the sake of her children, Ivy sustained more than a decade of torment and torture at the hands of this brute, by taking the beatings to protect them. In 1960, Plucking up a gallon of courage, Ivy divorced him. And moving from Yorkshire in the north of England, she fled from his fists to the seaside town of Westcliff-on-Sea to start again. As a single mother of 7 children, who, when and if she had a second to herself, earned money as a waitress. Her whole family needed a fresh start. And although an old-fashioned and impoverished part of the country, whose main income was furnished by a throng of tourists, mostly in the summer months, its sandy beaches, crisp sea air, and seaside fares made it a good place for a young family living on benefits. But always seeking love, the next man in Ivy's life came with a complication that none of them anticipated. Again being a soldier, this time based near Shoeburyness, he loved Ivy and wanted to marry her. But being transferred to Colchester, he flatly refused to raise another man's child, and Ivy had 7. Why she made this decision is something that we can never know. Maybe she was terrified of loneliness, was bullied by another brute into making a bad decision, or was traumatized by the abuse she had suffered. But with the exception of her 2 eldest daughters, Patricia and Ivy Jr., her 5 youngest children were put into care at the Seaview Children's Home in Shoeburyness, with Vic, her eldest of 3 sons, ending up in foster care, where he suffered abuse which changed the course of his life for the worse.
Vic later said, "She wasn't the angel they made her out to be."
She was cold to the children she'd abandoned. And with the relationship with the soldier lasting just 8 months, although she tried to get Susan, Victor, David, Stephen and Carol back from foster care, social services said no. This was the side of her life she hid from her customers, with her face always bright and bubbly, when her heart was plagued with guilt and regret. Despite her past, Ivy made the best of her present in Westcliff-on-Sea, an old-fashioned seaside town full of hotels, B&Bs, a golden mile of arcades and fairs with a famous pier. And in the Orange Tree, a greasy spoon café on the western esplanade built into the railway arches. Since 1968, she'd worked for Ernest Hassler as a waitress. But in 1972, having saved up enough money, she became its owner. Nicknamed Auntie Ivy, she was a popular and well-liked face in Westcliff. With the cafe far from busy off-season, she made ends meet by working part-time as a school cleaner. She had a small but close circle of friends who she liked to play bingo with. And plagued with loneliness, she'd started dating again. And although she'd fought to rebuild her life, she was haunted by her past. In 1965, when her son Vic was just 8 years old, he tried to rekindle a small hint of a relationship with his estranged mother. It's something this young boy would do for almost a decade, even though it was strained and frosty. But by the January of 1975, with Vic's life having hit the skids and descended into petty theft, age 18, when Ivy found out that he'd been locked up in a young offenders institute in Northampton, she wrote him a letter. He recalled,
"It was a Dear John letter. She said she was disgusted with me and that she never wanted to see me again."
For the second time in his life, his mother had rejected him. And with her brutal murder just days away, as much as he wanted to, he would never see her again. Sunday the 3rd of February 1975 was a typical late winter's day, being mild with a little drizzle. At 6 a.m, as was her routine, 48-year-old Ivy opened up the Orange Tree Cafe. Being off-season, it was quiet except for the usual crowd ordering fry-ups, scrambled eggs, beans on toast and mugs of tea. It was a non-exceptional day, just as the week and month prior had been, with no incidents or strangers. At 5:30 p.m, the sun set as Ivy locked up the cafe. And although a business owner, as women couldn't own their own bank accounts until later that year, wearing a bluey-green dress, she was last seen by her friend, Ernest Hassler, carrying the day's takings. and although that moment would have been a perfect opportunity for a thief, nobody robbed her. By 6 p.m, again as was typical, she returned home, alone, to 21A Holland Road. A little bungalow neatly hidden between a set of 2-story Victorian houses. A place you could only find if you knew about it. That evening, she had planned to meet up at Palace Bingo in Southend with Margaret Jury, a friend and a fellow cafe owner who was the mother of pop star Alvin Stardust, who looked remarkably like her. But instead, she stayed at home. She made a cup of tea, and having hidden the take-ins in an unused oven, which she did every day as she didn't own a safe. Having got into her nightdress, she watched the telly. On ATV, at 7 p.m. was Master of Melody. At 7:25 p.m. was Sunday Night at the London Palladium. At 8:20 p.m. was Once Before We Die, a 1966 war drama starring Ursula Andress, with the news at 10:15 p.m. and close down at 10:30 p.m. We have no idea what she watched, or who she may have watched it with. But right there, on the rug, it's likely that her killer left his DNA. At 10:30 a.m. the next morning, when Madeline, a friend of Ivy's daughter Pat, noticed that the cafe was still locked, with the help of Ivy's neighbour Stella Zammit, they gained access to the bungalow with their own keys. And Madeline screamed, as Stella ran out crying, "Oh God, there's blood everywhere." Ivy had been brutalised by a maniac, and her killing sent shockwaves across this small seaside town. With the investigation headed up by Detective Chief Inspector Peter Croxford of Southend CID, the motive was key to establish. Ivy was described as a gentle lady who wouldn't hurt a soul, and a very lonely person who didn't have any real friends. But with no signs of a break-in, and the door locked from the outside, Vic stated,
She wouldn't open the door to anyone.
so it's unlikely she'd let a stranger in. As for theft, DCI Croxford said,
Jewellery was left on the television set and £20 in cash nearby.
a red and white purse was missing, and £1,800, roughly £20,000 today, was found in the oven where she'd left it. The rooms hadn't been ransacked, but then maybe this was a kill for thrills, or a robbery gone wrong. No break-in, no theft, a superficial ransacking, and no clear motive. But was it MacKay? Found slumped on her living room settee, dressed in a nightdress, although her killer had attempted to strangle her with an unstated ligature. Ivy had been brutally bludgeoned about the head by a heavy object with considerable force. Blood had spattered up the walls, across the ceiling, over the floor, and with her skull smashed open, someone had attacked her with a hatred or a short burst of rage. With detectives keeping the weapon a secret to snare the killer when questioned, the press had wrongly claimed it was an axe, which could have been why it was linked to Father Crean's murder, when in fact it was a 20-inch long, 3-pound pry bar made of high-tensile steel, as used by mechanics in factories with gear wheels. It didn't belong in the house, yet it was dumped in a curtained alcove not far from the body. The crime scene was strange, but this wasn't the oddest detail about Ivy's senseless killing. As with Dr. Cameron the pathologist putting her time of death at around midnight, with the TV schedule finishing 90 minutes before that, her killer may have put the television on to obfuscate his true intent. And although no sexual assault was detected on this semi-clad woman, on the rug before her lay a semen stain. But being 2 decades before DNA was used in modern policing, it was missed by forensics. In total, 3,000 people were interviewed. 300 friends, family and associates were fingerprinted. A false sighting of Ivy at the Palace Bingo in Southend turned out to be her doppelganger, Margaret Jury, And of the police's likely suspects, her son Vic had a cast-iron alibi being in prison. A photo fit of a late 30s man with greying sandy blonde hair pointed to an innocent cafe regular. A tall, dark-haired man in his early 30s, similar to the man thought to be MacKay, who'd previously been seen at the Mercers, was spotted that day near the train station. And although, after his confession, Detective Superintendent Simon Dinsdale stated,
MacKay was a figure in the investigation, but as some kind of vagrant, he was ruled out.
Detective Chief Inspector Ray Newson also confirmed
he wasn't seen as a likely or possible suspect.
On the 7th of April 1975 at Southend Coroner's Court, after just 5 minutes deliberation, the jury returned a verdict that she was murdered by person or persons unknown. And although the investigation continued, soon every lead would be exhausted. Ivy Davies was buried at the Sutton Road Cemetery on the 17th of April. And until further evidence or a confession presented itself, the case stalled. Over the years, many theories and sightings have been presented. In 2017, a former waitress at the cafe claimed that Ivy had been killed by an escaped patient at the Runwell Mental Hospital posing as a doctor, who'd given his name as Patrick MacKay. Ivy's son Vic also said detectives told him
MacKay had signed on the dole in Southend,
which proved he was nearby during the week of the murder. But this could be police coercion, as seen in Mary Hines' murder, as we know where he was on the night that Ivy was killed. In the unreliable book Psychopath, it states,
MacKay said he knew the cafe and admitted that he'd contemplated robbing Miss Davies, but that he'd not been in Southend since 1972.
Even though there's no provable origin for this quote, coming from the unprovable source that MacKay said he'd visited the Mercers. Several newspapers also stated
MacKay had bragged in Brixton Prison about Ivy's murder.
But again, there's no name, no date, and no origin for this quote. And although sensational and feeding the legacy that MacKay had crafted, this kind of speculation also lets the real killer walk free, having never been punished for his heinous crime. In 2025, Vic, Ivy's son, told the tabloid newspaper The Sun,
the way she was killed was his MO. She was ripped apart on one side of the body. Whoever did it had undressed my mother, put her in a nightdress, and then put her on her bad side, then turned the TV on.
Details which don't appear in any other reliable source. And also, if true, facts which point to this not being a killing by MacKay, but by a sexual sadist. On an unspecified date in May 1975, after his infamous but shaky confession, MacKay was driven in a police van to the Orange Tree Cafe in Westcliff-on-Sea, and Ivy's home at 21A Holland Road. He stated he didn't recognise either, and wrote in his memoir,
I was never charged with this, and I think not too. It certainly wasn't me they wanted.
Which makes sense, as it's unlikely he was even there. On the night of Sunday the 3rd of February 1975, after Ivy had locked up a cafe and headed home, Patrick MacKay, a 6'2", stoutly built, mixed-race man with a soft voice, who never disguised his face in any of his attacks, robbed an elderly lady on the doorstep of her home in Red Lion Square in Holborn, central London. He stole £25 and an inscribed silver pen. She later identified her attacker as MacKay. So why would he kill a stranger in a place he barely knew? And how could he be in two places at once? The most likely theory was that, being lonely and dating again, Ivy had invited a man back to her home. In 2005, 30 years after the murder, with this cold case being reinvestigated, police discovered that when Ivy's bungalow was cleared out, a neighbour had kept her bloodied rug. It hadn't been touched in decades, and with advances in forensic technology, on it was not only Ivy's blood, but a semen stain. As a convicted murderer, Patrick MacKay's DNA had been retrospectively added to the database after it was set up in 1995, along with his fingerprints. A comparison was made, but it didn't link to him. In November 2006, Essex police arrested a 68-year-old unnamed man from Basildon who lived near Ivy at the time. And according to John Lucas in his reliable book on MacKay,
when Ivy rebuffed his advances, he lashed out with a pry bar. Covered in blood, he crept back to his own house, confessed to his partner, and she returned with him to Ivy's house to make the scene look like a burglary.
But with the crime scene gone and lacking insufficient evidence, the Crown Prosecution Service decided not to charge him, and he was bailed. MacKay was charged with 2 of the 8 additional murders. Only this wasn't one of them. But that's also part of the problem with his legacy as a serial killer, that he made his name as a liar. While incarcerated, MacKay was approached by an associate of Stanley Rogers, who was awaiting trial for the murder of 10-year-old Alison Chadwick, whose body had been found in a sack. MacKay was offered £15,000 and £20 a week for 15 years to confess to the killing, but instead he tried to blackmail Rogers. MacKay was an inveterate liar. Everybody knew it. And although he told Detective Superintendent Bland that he was
relieved that at last I was telling someone what I'd done,
he also later stated,
I deny any killings other than the 3 I admit. I can't recall any incident categorically linking me to those.
Tried at the Old Bailey on the 21st of November 1975 in Court 2, this minor celebrity wouldn't get the attention he desired or required to fully cement his legacy. As with his legal team fighting to get him convicted of manslaughter by diminished responsibility and not murder to ensure that he would be sent to a psychiatric hospital rather than a prison, his confession to killing 11 was dismissed. In a short but perfunctory trial, MacKay was declared sane and diagnosed with a severe psychopathic disorder, but not a mental illness, convicted of the manslaughters of Adele Price, Isabella Griffiths and Father Anthony Crean. Justice Milmo sentenced him to a minimum of 3 life sentences to be served concurrently, and held on Her Majesty's pleasure, he was warned that he may never be released. The killings of Heidi Manilk, Mary Hines, Stephanie Britton, Christopher Martin, Leslie Goodman, Sarah Rodmell, Ivy Davies, and the unnamed homeless man, if he ever existed, remain unsolved. Of those, MacKay stated,
I'm glad I wasn't done for those others.
And although unprovable, Scotland Yard stated,
we are satisfied that he is responsible for 10 killings.
With the only one they didn't think was him being Heidi's. MacKay was never sent to Broadmoor, along with the likes of Peter Sutcliffe, Robert Maudsley, and later Peter Bryan and Daniel Gonzalez. Instead, being insane but volatile, he served his time in Category A prisons, where as one of the most violent prisoners, he attacked staff and held a teacher hostage. In March 1995, at the end of his minimum term, an independent parole board declared,
his risk is too high to be safely managed in the community.
So he remained behind bars, later making him the UK's longest-serving continuous prisoner. But growing older and passive, since 2017, he's been housed at HMP Leyhill, a low-security men's open prison, and has been seen on monitored day trips in Bristol. Now aged 73, and having changed his name to David Groves, it's uncertain if he will ever be released. He's a man that the law is too terrified to release, that society doesn't want back, and with the truth about his crimes barely known by the wider public. As Vic, Ivy's son, sums up,
Everyone knows he did more. He hasn't shown any remorse.
Even though there's no hard evidence to prove that he had. So why isn't Patrick MacKay as famous as other killers like Shipman, Christie, or Haig? Like his life, his legacy had no consistency. As a boy, his early crimes were nothing more than random acts of robbery to fund his alcoholism, with the sadistic cruelty he was later famous for, only there to gain attention. He was lost, alone, confused, angry, and bounced between institutions that didn't care about him, being told that he was worth nothing and diagnosed as a psychopath aged 11. He was ignored, except when he was bad. Like his robberies, his killings were unplanned. The first, Isabella Griffiths, was a rage-fueled robbery which went wrong. The second, Adele Price, was similar and was a murder as many of the others could have been. Father Green's killing was personal. And then, MacKay quit, as he couldn't commit to anything, even murder. And that's the problem. Not only did he repeatedly lie, not only did he fail to provide proof, but also, in all of his murders, whether he was convicted of, confessed to, or suspected of, all are inconsistent. In his memoir written before his trial, MacKay acknowledged,
"My life was wasted. I now realise that it is wasted forever to rot. When I look at myself, I could put a bullet through my head for the kind of bloody life that I've had. But I don't know who would do me that service. I have often thought to myself, whenever I'm alone, that it would have been the best thing I could ever have done."
As all he brought to the world was pain and misery to others, like his father. And his legacy was ruined. With just 3 confirmed kills to his name, MacKay has been usurped in the pantheon of serial killers, as Nielsen had 12, Sutcliffe had 13, Dahmer had 17, Bundy had 20, and Shipman had 218 confirmed. If he had really killed 11, as he claimed, he would be infamous. But being convicted not of murder, but of the lesser charge of manslaughter, not being willful murders, his manslaughters make him ineligible to be a serial killer. As a late decision to make something of his life, MacKay had pushed his luck just a little bit too far. So now he's not remembered as an infamous serial killer, but as a serial liar. That was the final part of Patrick MacKay, Two Sides of a Psychopath, by Murder Mile UK True Crime. Parts 1 to 4, covering in detail the killings of Father Green, Isabella Griffiths and Adele Price, as well as MacKay's life, crimes and trial, are now available in full as part of this crossover series with the True Crime Enthusiast podcast, with all 6 parts by Murder Mile available now in this feed. Just search Patrick MacKay, Two Sides of a Psychopath, or click the link in the show notes.